1. 1. 1, 2. 1, 2.
Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India.
We can start now. Good morning, everybody. Wow. You all do look kind of like I feel, hey?
Thank you. Amazing.
Well, what, did you go to bed early, Manu? Well, then there's the Australian sarcasm at work. Okay, so here we are, the last day of DConf for the first order of business. Before we get to the first order of business, I believe Andre has an announcement he needs to make.
Hi, folks. Morning. Is this working? All right. Terrific. Okay, so I wanted to make an announcement. I've like the proverbial good news and bad news. What do you want to hear first?
Both.
Both at the same time. So Paul Graham of Y Combinator and via web fame, he wrote a number of essays which I enjoy very much reading, and one of them is entitled "The Top Idea in Your Mind." And what he's talking about is, I can hear myself, right?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So what that essay is about, I recommend anybody to read it. It's short and very insightful. Is the most important idea in your mind is the one that you naturally drift towards when there's no thinking to be made. When you take a shower, just before you go to sleep, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing that just comes to mind would be the top idea in your mind. And if you work on hard problems like us, definitely this is the top idea in your mind should be some sort of a problem, a programming problem, or this kind of stuff. And for years, the top idea in my mind has been, of course, our community and my position in it. And leadership is the kind of idea that takes over the top of your mind. Now, what happened lately is I've had a couple of health scares in my immediate family, and that took over the top of my mind. And I found it difficult to keep two ideas simultaneously on top of my mind. And I found myself like thinking too much about family and spending more time with the kids and my folks and whatnot. And that made it difficult for me to exercise the leadership that our community deserves. So I felt guilty about it. So I thought, this is not nice. So I'm happy to announce an addition to our leadership, which is I'm going to pass sort of my top level leadership functions to Attila Neves, who is not here.
That's a sign of a leader that had a good beer conf, I think.
After a drunken night, he's okay. So that's not a good start. No. I'll continue to do a lot of stuff. I'm not just disappearing. I'll continue to be managing the foundation's assets. I'm the treasurer of the foundation. I made a very significant donation in the 6-digit area. I'm not going to say exactly how much, but it's quite significant. It should keep us running for a very long time. And believe me, that's significant money to me. It's not pocket change. And I encourage any companies that use Deprecation to make money to actually donate money to us. That would be terrific. I'll continue doing the accounting of the foundation, manage the investments, all the treasury of the foundation, the legal, nonsense and whatever. These are things that are difficult and not easy, but they are things that don't require the top of your mind. I'll also continue to work with my students. I have 2 great students whom you saw speaking during this conference. I'm very happy about their budgeting, their starting career and their position in the community. I'll probably take more students in the future. The foundation is going to continue its scholarship programs, and Attila will actually help, with mentoring our students. And there's a lot to be said about Attila's position at Symmetry. Symmetry, so I spoke to Laith about it, and Symmetry has been extremely generous to actually sponsor Attila's time as a leader of the foundation. Thank you very much, Laif. Because Attila told me that, well, there's only there's only so much time in the day, and I can't really volunteer all my time. So essentially, it was a simple problem for him, and Laif agreed to just step in and say, Attila will be sponsored essentially to spend time with on our community at least one day a week, I recall. So it's going to be some sort of a soft. There's going to be some soft barrier there. So I think there's like a number of things I wanted to say about this. I forgot most of them. I wanted to make sure that I thank Laif, that I thank Attila, of course, for taking this, although he's not here. And to thank you all for being a great community. I'm going to continue to be around making technical contributions. And to the extent I have sort of a technical standing within the community, I'll continue trying to influence things the way I believe they should be influenced. But sort of the more formal leadership role is going to be taken over by Attila. Thank you very much.
Yes. Well, I'm pretty sure everybody in this room appreciates heavily your leadership and input over the years. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you around in the future. There's some more. Okay, so with that announcement out of the way, we're about to start the annual general meeting. Before we do that, everybody is welcome to participate here, but if you'd rather just get straight on with the hackathon stuff, by all means, there's a separate room downstairs somewhere in this corner of the building where you can go down there and, sorry, what's that? Okay, so it's downstairs anyway. You should be able to find it easy. You can go down there, chat, hack, whatever you people do. That's fine. Maybe leave the drinking for later, though. It's 9 a.m. Come on. Now, the AGM is planning to meet at 10:30. If that runs on a little bit, cool. But either way, back in here at 11 a.m. and it will be exclusively hackathon at that point. So let's get started with the AGM.
Well, I wanted to add a little bit. I'm really pleased that Attila is going to be
leaving.
Well, Attila, Andre and I are alike in a lot of ways, which we don't complement each other very well. Well, Attila is very different from us, and I think that having somebody who's has different skills than Andre and I would be a very welcome addition. And Attila, of course, has our full confidence.
He's got that charisma going for him, doesn't he?
Yep. I'm not a charismatic person, and Attila is, for one small example. Another thing is you guys are stuck with me. I'll be around till I get carried out in the box. So that's my plan for the foreseeable future. So. I guess on with AGM. All right. I think Nick has the agenda, so.
Yes.
Just give him a microphone.
Oh.
Sit up there.
Yeah, sure. It's working? Good. All right. All right. So the agenda, for those who haven't seen it, is on GitHub under my GitHub, the Wilsonator/DLang AGM, for those who want to follow along. Just let me know when you've all found it. What? Internet work.
You don't have it locally?
Let's try this again. Hang on.
That'd be great.
The City Road.
broke it.
That is the plan. So
Oh,
we
okay.
don't hear the, because this has the feedback thing.
Oh, all right.
So Nick, can you connect to
Can I connect to that? What's that on the?
the screen, the big one?
Yeah. Okay. So internet's back up and working. Can I, what's the Wi-Fi for the?
So what? I think
Oh.
that's the. Can you connect your laptop to the cable here?
I can try. I always have fun with Macs and multiple screens, but I can try. You can stay on the table and use this. Let's see what happens with this. This click share. What's going on here? Quite unexpectedly. Let's try that again. Don't send. No, it doesn't like that.
Here comes the
Here comes the technical assistance.
cavalry.
Yeah, just click for the Mac.
Yeah. It doesn't like it.
Okay, just eject it. Okay. Otherwise, I'm gonna pull it there.
Sorry.
So otherwise, I'll put somewhere in
I've got HDMI on this.
yeah,
I don't know whether I have an HDMI port. Right it. USB port, Thunderbolt port. Something else.
I'm really tired of
Is it working? Is my laptop that working?
Sure. Let's try it.
yeah, try that. If not, we got this one.
Is it working?
Where's the application? Mac. Right.
Well, maybe just try the lectern. That worked yesterday.
So what has happened? When did I
I
click on that?
tried. You tried starting it. It didn't
Didn't do anything. Just
started, but it's not actually starting.
Yeah, just ignore this one. For this one, I'm gonna send a feed.
which one's this one? On the bolt.
Display porn.
Is that which lightning bolt's that one?
Either of these.
Either of those.
Yeah, something's happening.
Something's happening. Screen goes dark.
So it's probably going to.
It's currently another screen. Oh, it's up there. Right.
Oh,
Yeah, hold on. I
except
gotta.
you lost the screen there.
I know. I just gotta change it so that it's mirroring. Mirror displays. There you go.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
There you go.
Great.
Oh, and inverted scrolling. That's all right. I can deal with that. It's fine.
Yeah, so for those playing at home, this is the stuff we normally hide in between talks, but I think we're almost ready to go now, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's get it on.
Okay. So welcome to the AGM. So this is, I've got sort of four sort of main sections that I want to cover. The big ticket items is establishing communicated vision to the community under vision. DIPS, obviously, dealing with how we can adapt the process to better suit the outcomes that we want to have. General topics, which is a grab bag of issues that have annoyed me over the past year. If you have any points that you want to add on any of these stages, please just do shout out, because I don't want to be talking for the whole time. And then awesome, thank you. And then internal, which is issues related. That wasn't us. Okay. Issues related to the standard library, the runtime, and the compiler. So we used to have these two. Used to put out a vision document every 6 months. That stopped at some point in time. And so this particular session sort of seeks to revive the publication of the DLang Foundation's vision, and sort of the proceeds of this AGM and this section in particular sort of form the basis for that, hopefully going forward in the future. So these are the points that I think are the sort of the big ticket items that are sort of not atomic projects that that going forward we would really benefit getting progress on and getting making progress on. So I suppose let's start at the top. The dips. So the dips we've got a different section on. Is Sebastian here yet? Sebastian. So Dub, as I'm sure we all know, is a critical piece of infrastructure in the D community, and it's been, I'd say, somewhat neglected in terms of its how critical it is versus how much sort of effort's been put into that. So I don't know if you could say a few words about the projects you've put, the things that we need to do based on that.
Well, I guess everyone has used DAP in the past couple of months or years and realized that it was kind of frustrating. Well, we have improved it a lot. So the DAP registry doesn't crash randomly anymore because it has less than 200 megabytes on the server. Thanks a lot for Sönke for actually hosting the registry for free for us. I have a couple of issues right here. So currently Sönke is just hosting all the data packages in the registry for free for us. So we obviously want to get a stage where we don't depend on a random car accident and we lose all the information out there. And the other part is that there are a lot of things in DAP package manager that are frustrating to users. So for example, a single build of YP can take 2 minutes on a fresh machine. So if you just build a Docker container where it always does download all the dependencies from fresh, this is really slow because it used to make a single API request to the DAP registry every time and then download every package single-threadedly. So we have fixed a couple of these issues, but there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which I think can improve the user experience of the entire D community. And currently we have 1.5K packages on the registry. So that's why I was trying to go with this call for arms on the news group, that this is one of the things that no one is really working on. I think there's one pull request every month on the DAP repository. And everyone is just writing his own amazing library, and no one is really caring about this really critical piece of infrastructure. And if you look at Rust, so I recently built like a simple tool, and I had 200 dependencies there, and it was still faster than just building YPD, where you have 10 dependencies. Of course, there's a lot of other reasons, but just generally improving the user experience of that, I think, will have a lot of people just enjoying D more and also will help people putting more libraries up to DAP. So generally a good thing to improve on.
Right. We'll come back to that sort of later with the Project Horizon stuff. So I'd like to ask you to what's happening with SAFE these days? Is it done? Is it?
Well, I presume you kind of mean DIP 1000?
Yes.
Okay. I've gotten Phobos to compile and successfully pass its tests with DIP 1000. The only remaining obstacle is if you're mixing code that is compiled with DIP 1000 and with code that's not compiled with DIP 1000, you can get linker errors. And I know how to fix that. Sebastian has very helpfully boiled down the test cases. It's just basically adjusting the name mangling so it matches, which shouldn't be too difficult. And I can get to that when I get back. And then DIP 1000 is ready to go and use. It's been a long process.
So what's the plan for a migration phase to switch to DIP 1000 being enabled by default? Is there any plan? Because like, if we just switch it on immediately, there will be much code breakage, right?
There were surprisingly few changes to Phobos needed to get it to work.
So remember this DIP 25 that we have now in DMD for 5 or 6 years?
Yes.
And we tried to enable it by default, and I think 60% of all DAP packages on the project just failed. So we fixed some of them. We still can't enable DIP 25, which is a lot older and a lot restrictive to DIP 1000. And the other problem is that you mixed a couple of breaking changes with DIP 1000 because you didn't want to break current code. So all these changes are also part of this flag, which will be, lead to more breakage.
No, the breakage does happen, but what I'm saying, the fixes to fix it tend to be not many. You know, Phobos wasn't full of everything crumbling down around our ears when it turned DIP 1000. It was just kind of a few key spots needed to be adjusted. The other thing is when DIP 1000 becomes a default, what happens is then the DIP 1000 switch or something equivalent will be there to revert to the old behavior. So it's still not a disaster with code. If you don't want to change it, you could just throw the revert to the old behavior switch and for the compiler, and that'll go on for some number of years.
I mean, on that note, Seb, is that actually empirically known that DIP 1000 is definitely going to break a lot of dub code, or is that what is suspected based on past experience with DIP 25? Because I think that's an important difference. If we don't empirically know, we should find out now.
Oh, we know because I guess.
Yeah, just wait for the microphone before you speak, please.
So we know from the experience with just other tiny changes. Well, let me put it in that way. So we know from DIP 25, which is a lot smaller and a lot less controversial, and has been there for 6-7 years. And we can't even enable that one. And what I'm trying to say is that not only the safety changes are part of DIP 1000, but also other changes.
Well, we had code at Systematic where we did rely on scope, making sure that a closure doesn't allocate through GC, and that is broken since the compiler version that changed the meaning of scope in order to change it to the meaning of DIP 1000, which is slightly related.
Well, scope on delegates was largely ignored, and people used it in good faith, but since it was largely ignored by the compiler, it was often used mistakenly. So those tend to need to be corrected. It's not anybody's fault. I mean, if the compiler's ignoring it, it's just too easy to use it incorrectly. So that stuff will have to be taken care of when you try DIP 1000. And I expect people will have some difficulty figuring out how to change their code to DIP 1000, and that's what the Learn forums and stuff like that are for. It can be a bit intimidating at first. The good news is most of the time, because of inference, it just works.
Okay, so what I was basically getting at with my initial question is, like, how do we get people to adopt DIP 1000? That's basically it. Because if we, at the moment, we have like a switch to enable it, probably a lot of people are not using it. Then if we switch to DIP 1000 by default, we introduce a flag which can disable it. So big code bases will just disable it in the start because they cannot like do the switch immediately. So how do we get people to adopt it and not rely on the switch for like 5-6 years? And like basically, if we have a regular deprecation process, you will get a lot of warning and you can fix those gradually. And that's not possible with DIP 1000 at the moment. So is there like a chance that we can move towards like emitting deprecation warnings?
Some deprecation warnings are possible with DIP 1000. As a general rule, I don't think it is because of the way the type inference or whatever, you can't kind of halfway get into it, which is what you would have with deprecation. Essentially, the switch to revert to the old behavior will stay in until it becomes impossible or impractical to continue with that. And that, I don't know how long that will be. We'll try to be as generous as possible, but there's no real need to be in a big hurry to disable the old way of doing things. We'll just, stretch it out as long as we can and only do it if and when we have to.
So one thing that I just remembered about the experience with DIP 1000, it took us 3 years to convert Phobos, and it was mostly Walter's effort. So a couple of other people trying to actually convert those modules to be able to compile with DIP 1000. But maybe my question is, who here understands DIP 1000 fully? Just raise their hands. And I think that's the problem, why we will have a huge adoption problem with enabling by default. Because everyone will just use the rewrite flag.
The good news about DIP 1000 is when you use it wrong, your code doesn't break, it won't compile. So you're not going to be lulled into a false sense of, I think it's working and it's not. It's either going to compile successfully or it's not. There's not going to be it compiles, but it doesn't. But I did it all wrong kind of behavior.
I think the real question is who here understands the benefits of safety. Thank you very much. And that's the real question. So DIP 1000 is a conduit to safe code. It's not. You don't need to understand all the details of DIP 1000 to understand its benefits.
At some point, you can just simply, because the compiler will tell you if you do it wrong, you can just like randomly put return and scope things in there until it compiles. That's actually a viable technique to get this to work. Yeah, I see Sebastian shaking his head. It's like if you use const wrong, the compiler's going to complain, your code isn't going to break. It won't compile.
What I was trying to say here is that as long as no one fully understands DIP 1000, how to use it, they can't make the changes to switch to it. And I don't know anyone in the Phobos core contributors who actually fully said, whenever there were those return ref changes, that they fully knew where to add the return ref. So if you don't have Phobos core people who fully understand where to add those changes, how do we expect the entire community to do this?
So do you think some sort of an article, a tutorial would help?
Documentation.
Well, certainly the documentation and tutorials can be better, but I haven't pushed scope and all that stuff on people because I couldn't in good conscience if the Phobos wasn't entirely working with DIP 1000. It just wasn't right to do that. So, but now that you're pretty much on the home stretch of getting Phobos to work, we can sort of ramp up a little pressure and more help with people understanding it to spread the knowledge about it, I guess.
Yes, so talking about a little bit of pressure, I mean, we could just automate scraping code.dlang.org, testing all the projects to compile them with the DIP 1000, create a pull request if it works, saying, hey, it compiles with DIP 1000, maybe want to merge and release a new version. And if it doesn't work, create an issue there. I mean, we can automate that. We can write this today and be sort of push it on everybody. I think Zep is right that people maybe don't understand it, and maybe they just don't have the time or initiative right now to sort of learn by themselves. But if they see an issue on their favorite project they published and saying, oh, it doesn't compile with DIP 1000, maybe they will have a look.
And to that direction, we can do things like no official decode in the repository will be accepted if it doesn't compile with DIP 1000.
So I'd like to point out, we've got a similar tool for dealing with checking whether the packages on code.dlang.org work, and it was written by NEIA Netadella or something on the forum.
Okay.
Anyway, there is a thing that scrapes packages for release for D&D on code.dlang.
So yeah, first I would second that call, because I think making this an empirical question, what definitely breaks and we know it breaks, is vital. I think the other thing, I think there's always a difference between understanding something like DIP 1000, really from the inside out, versus understanding what you have to do to use the functionality it exposes. Those two are not the same thing. And so it's not necessarily so scary that only two people in the room say they understand this thing. As long, with that in mind though, I think it's very important that the learning experience of adapting Phobos to this, that we do get really rigorous documentation out of that covering all of the cases, and also where we have known issues, where we have breakage, to try and get paths forwards as soon as possible. So things like the delegate case that Stefan raised, if we can actually have some clear line saying, okay, so this is what you want to achieve, this is now how you achieve it with DIP 1000, and just have as many cases as possible of, for how to adapt, that would be really important.
If you're worried about people just turning the switch off and never changing the code, you might just put the nag in the beginning if it's disabled. Warning, DIP 1000 will be compulsory by 2023 or whatever date you pick.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea.
Might I recommend that somebody volunteer to be the DIP 1000 point person to follow up and make sure that any code breakages are handled and tests are covered?
You won't have to start until Phobos is working. Like I said, I don't want to push this on anybody if we're not, really down with Phobos is successful.
Right, and once it's ready, I think the only way we're going to be able to have a smooth transition is to make sure that we have one person monitoring everything.
Sorry, what?
Write it down.
Have you got it?
Sorry?
Are you doing it?
Here, just.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was. Just did it. What?
If it takes it longer to do this, just write it on a piece of paper.
Actually, it's probably best if somebody else writes that, because I have shockingly terrible handwriting. All right. I think we've had some good discussion on that. Let's move on to the next item. Shared. Have we managed to convince Andre yet? No. Have we managed to convince you yet?
What?
Of disabling read and write access to shared as a first item on the list of things to do to fix shared?
It doesn't seem like a plan.
If I may say something to that. So you want shared to be a magic thing that allows you to enforce thread safety by just putting an annotation on there. There is one way that could achieve that, which is you lock everything every time you access anything that's shared. The performance of that will be very, very bad. And the only thing that I see is Manu's proposal. If we want to keep performance, the only thing we can do is drawing a hard line in the sand between thread local and non-thread local things, and forcing the user to deal with non-thread local access by themselves, because they're the only people who know what they want to do and how they can lock or do things lock-free. They're the only people who can know what synchronization primitive is appropriate.
That's, I think that basically there are very difficult issues here at work, and I'm not sure it's fully appreciated how difficult they are. So if we make share like unusable, right? So nobody can do anything with shared. Then how do you use it? So everybody's kind of thinking, I'm going to shoot my way out with casts. Is that true? Is that right?
Yes.
Right, Doom style, right? Just get a big machine gun. So shooting your way away with out with casts is just not, gotta define the cast. Under what circumstances are gonna be the casts okay to do, and what guarantees that the compiler offer, and what guarantees can you count from the machine that your casts that you insert are going to work properly. And that takes us to the whole. So essentially, other languages have looked at the stuff, and they conclude that memory models would be the way to go. And to say, oh, we're gonna disable shared, and we're gonna take care of do our own casting. Don't worry. I don't think it's a plan. It just sounds like not the plan.
All right. So I should say the plan is roughly, disable read and write access to shared, and casting is, you need to cast in order to do it, and that is unsafe. So your synchronization and threading primitives therefore must be trusted, and then the compiler can ensure that you're not abusing your primitives. And I think that is the only real way forward, because the compiler can't know what array of primitives you're going to use, but it can know how they're supposed to be composed, and can error out if you are miscomposing those primitives.
The compiler can't verify that, because suppose you have a struct that has two fields, X and Y, that are shared. And if you put locks, with compiler primitives or whatever around access to X and Y, you still have a problem, because you lock X, you modify it, you unlock X, then you lock Y, modify it, and unlock Y, but suddenly somebody else could have come in there between those locks and changed Y, and now you have a tear. So it's not sufficient. The lock must be placed around the semantic unit of what your transaction is going to be. And there's no way for the compiler or the language to tell what that transaction unit is. So I don't think that just, having atomic access and calling it trusted is going to produce a false sense of security.
Stefan?
Yes, that is exactly the point. The point is the compiler can't do useful things with shared because it does not have enough knowledge. Therefore, the user is the only person who can make sure to use it correctly. So if we were in C++, it's the Wild West out there. You can just access anything. Nobody is going to check if it's accessed correctly, if it's thread local, everything is global by default. You have to have high discipline and coding standards to make that work. If indeed we can distinguish between shared, so thread global and thread local data, we can at least show you when you try to access something you're not supposed to access. However, the guarantee that you have acquired a lock or any other synchronization primitive to access a certain thing is something that can only given by the user, by a dedicated programmer who writes the low-level code and writes the documentation, says how things should be accessed.
Well, I still agree with Andre that we need a memory model and we need to understand the memory model. And does anybody have expertise on a formal specification of memory models here?
I do have some, not in writing the specs, but understanding what they do and how they work and all the hardware under them. Yeah.
Because there are memory models formally specified for other languages, and we ought to have a plan to sort of mix and match what would make the most sense for D from that and add it to the specification. At least we have a starting point.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we want to mix and match because those different memory models have very different approach to define it. So you're gonna have we have primitive
we should adopt
with each other.
Yeah, we should adopt what works for the D language. We are in a fortunate position with shared that we distinguish statically between what's shared and what's not. But I think we should start from an expertise in that kind of stuff. Like for example, starting from C++'s memory models. C++ defines their own synchronization primitives, provides guarantees about what's defined and what's not. So it's not the Wild West. It's
there's
a lot well defined.
There's a lot of good work we can draw from.
So we can't. Disabling shared is avoiding the work.
I attended a C++ meeting in the 90s where they were going to talk about multi-threaded stuff. And it was a room full of the top C++ people. And most of it, the meeting was run by two people, the only two people who had any idea what they were talking about. And the rest of us just sat around with, our face hanging open, not understanding anything.
I was there too, and I was not one of the two.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Andre and I have not progressed in our knowledge of it, except we understand that we're incompetent and ignorant about it.
And this is a good place to interject that they are looking for somebody to fully specify shared, so we can get an implementation. The Human Resource Fund that we've recently started is going to be our first project in getting shared. So if you guys really are serious about wanting to see us solve this problem, help us get the money to hire the experts that we need to do it.
So
great,
please there.
Awesome. That's an awesome thought.
No, but I'm also willing to spend part of my time in that, but I could not do it alone. I think I just don't have enough time to do it alone, but I'd be happy to work with someone because I have expertise in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also really want that problem to be solved.
Yeah.
And so I should also add that this is it's not, nobody's born with that kind of expertise. So it's, essentially the door is open for anybody who wants to learn this stuff, and it's good for a career anyway. So it's, anybody who wants to sit down and read the Java and the C++ specifications, figure out what the memory model, what wine goes with memory models, right? What was the right pairing? I was making a joke, but it's just nothing happened.
Well, it's true. If you want to improve your job prospects, become an expert in
that's
memory
fantastic.
models is a real nice thing to have on your resume. And every one of you guys is smart enough to do that.
Yeah, and only 15 people in the world are kind of available. So probably that fund would need to be quite meaty. So this is the real work. We need to do the real work, not kind of disable shared and be happy about it.
Reading those is not
Yes,
I don't
please.
actually. I really don't want to make a comment, but I have to. Hello.
Yeah, you can't tell.
I think I think this is sort of spun out of my bullshit, but I don't think I've suggested disabling shared and being happy with it. What I've suggested is disabling shared as a stopgap and making the current definition of it at least slightly useful. If you want to do the work that you describe, which could take God knows how many more years, that's fine, and I'm all for that. But right now, shared is objectively broken. You can just write to the members. The recommendation generally, which is littered everywhere, is that you cast shared away when you take a lock. We've been saying that for years, and I think that's what people are doing. And I think that actually works, believe it or not. Like, it does. Even though it's not fully specified, it does work in practice. So right now, the fact that we can write to shared undermines the recommendation we make today and any usefulness that it has to us today. It would be really nice if it was useful right now, even if not fully specified, and I really don't want to wait another 5-10 years for that.
Regarding the casting, can we use the synchronized statement and allow to pass in shared variables and have the compiler peel off the first layer of shared and then make them accessible within the statement and make sure that they don't escape and have it lock before and unlock after the statement?
That is a good idea. We've actually had that idea for
It was in TDPL, right?
for 10 years.
Yeah, it was in TDPL, but we just didn't execute on it. And I think it would be good, but of limited utility. We need to have like a more general synchronization mechanism because very few people use classes at scale. Most people are doing with structs. So I think, we need a more general solution.
First, same as Amiri, I would also volunteer part of my very scarce free time to work on shared. I do have a little bit of experience with how CPUs actually synchronize their work and how the cache coherency stuff is done in hardware. But also, I don't have much time to spend on it. I already have many projects going. And the other thing is, what if after the 10 and 15 years of work, we do find out that the only solution, that there is no general solution, and we stick at what we have right now, then switching to the thing that disables access to shared, which is not avoiding work, but rather telling the user where work has to happen, is the sooner we make that switch, the sooner people can get used to it and can get started using shared.
All right. I also wish to point out that we've got a long agenda and we're already 50 minutes in. And if we don't cut things off at some point and move on, we'll be here for a week.
Is there any question is there any point up on the agenda that we don't have 10 questions for? So the point is that we're going to have to keep the number of questions down, it seems. So.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next item. The PRQs for DMD and the runtime and Phobos are rather long. We should try and get them down at some point in the hackathon. If people don't have stuff to do, I'm more than happy to help you with compiler stuff and getting old pull requests. I made a decision on either this still needs a bit of work, this is useful, this is old and no longer applicable, or this is something we want, we should do it.
There's a tag for things like are good ideas, but maybe not quite right, or maybe they could inform future efforts in those directions. And that's to close them, but put them into Phantom Zone. That's what the Phantom Zone is for. So the reason I did the Phantom Zone things is when you close a PR, although it still exists on GitHub, nobody ever sees it again. And I wanted to have a label for, so we were kind of using the tail end of the PRs as the good ideas, but for future reference thing instead. And so it should make things a little easier to close. but there's still good ideas and have useful information in there. So the Phantom Zone is a possibility for a lot of those older PRs to clear them out.
Right. The other one is Bugzilla. How many open issues we got now? In Bugzilla, 5,000? We've got about 3,000 for D&D, but a lot of these are old and may no longer apply. There are a bunch of D1 issues there. So if we can close a bunch of Bugzilla issues, and if we can get some sort of prioritization for critical issues and issues that need to be resolved, that would be good.
Okay, I don't want to close any PRs or open bugs because they're old. There's sometimes pressure to do that. Anything that hasn't been fixed in so many years should just be closed. I think that is a poor approach, because some bugs are old simply because we don't know how to fix them, not that they aren't real bugs, and we shouldn't be hiding our problems like that.
We can close this later. There's a tag that we can search for, because there's stuff that is just there forever, and
Regarding the D1 issues, I asked Leandro Lucarola from Sociomantic about it yesterday, because Sociomantic is the only D1 user we had, and he said, "Go ahead, close them."
So, okay, I thought we already had closed the D1 issues. I guess not all of them.
No, we put them on a specific tag.
Okay.
I think it's high time. Just can't keep Obsidic forever, right?
So we should create a Phantom Zone tag or equivalent tag, close them and tag them with that. So if people want to look for open D1 issues or unresolved ones, they can find one. How about that? Will that work?
I guess it's on a case-by-case basis, because some bugs are already solved in D2, not just solved in the D1 compiler, and I don't think there's any. It would need double checking on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think there's any D1 only bug that are applying to D2. That's the point of D1 only.
Okay. Do you want to be in charge of the triage?
You just so?
Because you got some good ideas, and you're in contact with Sociomantic. So yeah. Okay. Cool.
Right. We've talked a bit about a greater fidelity. Oh, sorry.
Just want to point out there are two open Bugzilla issues, 17839 and 17840, which are basically take ownership and close or commit all GitHub PRs below the number 6,000 and check the status of all Bugzilla issues under the number 2,000 as a sort of like a starting point. Right. I raised that back in 2017 and still haven't had time to get through it.
Okay.
There's not too much left in the queue on that front. So GitHub stuff, I guess it's about 25 issues left below that number. So yeah,
all right.
If anyone wants to,
I guess
that's at least one milestone.
We need a plan on what to do with the open issues, and then first come up with a plan how they're going to be tagged and all that stuff, and then go ahead and execute. Sound good?
All right. Oh.
I feel if we do this by hand, we're never going to finish, because we're just too few people, to be honest. I think we need to automate that. I mean, many of the Bugzilla requests have source code attached to them, like a minimal breaking thing that shows the bug. I think we need to automate that, pull that source out, create a test suite out of that, and if the failure passes, I think he already has that, or somebody Yeah, so we just have to have that. Doing that by hand is just too tedious and annoying. And as I think, as pretty much all the speakers stated in the last 3 days, tedious and boring work will never be done because it's tedious and boring.
Yep.
So I'm just going to add to that Vladimir already has a repo called debugstats, where you have manually extracted all the bugs. Not bugs, but the source code to it. And he also actually tried to fork Mozilla's fork of Bugzilla back to Bugzilla mainline, so that we can get some of the improvements in Bugzilla, but I think he just ran out of time and currently doesn't have the time to do anything like that. I'm just saying that we could do it, but no one has the time for it currently.
Okay. I'll talk with Walter and Andre and Attila and figure out what a Bugzilla team would need to do, and then I'll ask for some volunteers to help out with this later on. So let's move on.
So next item is a greater fidelity specification. We've historically had a reference implementation that just happens to have a spec. It would be good at some point to have a more formal and a more useful spec. I don't know if you want to say anything on this, Andre.
I think it's of huge importance at this point in this lifetime. We just gotta parallelize the effort. It's and one nice thing that I think I mentioned in semi-privately, but not publicly during the Ask Us Anything. Seb had these great macros, which are essentially examples in the specifications that are automatically tested for they should compile or they shouldn't compile. And I think those are like an amazing tool to keep us honest. So I think a lot of good work in the specification can be done by simply adding examples to the assertions made in the specification. And this is not difficult. It's not it's not memory models. Okay, it's something that you, me, and anybody can do, and it would be great. It clarifies what the specification says. It keeps it honest. It keeps it truthful. And whenever we change the language in the wrong way, it's just gonna fail to compile. So we're gonna have it's terrific.
Are there any parts in the specification which are up to the standards where we want to go to, which can be taken as a reference?
Any parts of the current specification that would be good models for? I think the later the better, essentially, because later we kind of got smart about it, and Walter made some good edits. I made a few, and I think those would be better. At best, however, we should inspire ourselves from other solid languages, such as Java, C++, Haskell, Scheme, all languages that have been serious about standardizing themselves. And for us, like in terms of kind of machine model and everything, C++ will be the closest. And as I mentioned in my talk, a great thing about C++ is they specify all the crazy things they do, right? And I think this helps the community a great deal, because essentially you just kind of can look at the document and see what's supposed to happen. Even if what happens is too complicated, all the criticisms that people wrote over the years, essentially, but it's defined what happens, and this is a huge asset.
I'm pretty much to blame for the state of this specification, because I always start out writing with good intentions, but it's such a large document, I sort of slowly run out of steam, and I would get kind of slapdashy about it, which is not good, and that's entirely my fault. But fortunately, there are plenty of language specifications out there that show the style and the tone and the formalism that people expect in a language document. So we don't really have to invent anything. Just, pick your favorite standards from C# or Java or C++ or C, and look at the style in which they do it. That's the style and way we want to do ours.
I totally agree with that. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in that regard, but we somehow need to agree on the language which we want to use to formalize the specification. We need to know how to write it, and I can take the language from the C++ specification, and Laith takes the language of the Haskell specification, and it will be quite different. So we need to agree on some form.
It's not that different. It's just you just don't do it like a chatty sort of.
They call it standard Ds, and I think there are quite a few differences between the way C++ and Haskell describe things. Probably closest to us would be C++, so that would be probably the default template. Ugh, that's a pun. The default template to use for our own terminology and whatnot. We really don't need to be creative here. There's this video of Stan Smith. Who knows about Stan Smith? The famous American tennisman. Okay, so the best tennisman from America ever. He had a video teaching the right hand, the classic shot in tennis, and he said you gotta practice that until there's no personality in it. It's boring. And I think there's a very nice lesson in there, because essentially we gotta be boring in the specification. It shouldn't reflect your personality, your bubbling, awesome, charismatic je ne sais quoi that you have, right? It should simply be an impersonal document that just says things as they are, and that's it. And Walter has transgressed into he has these documents about like contracts and stuff, and actually they're part of the specification, but they're articles.
They were written originally as articles, yes.
Right.
And
So
then we sort of stuck
there was
them in
no
the spec.
specification for contracts, so he took the article and put it in a spec directory, which is not the right way to go about things. So I mean, he knows. I'm not, it's not nothing new to him or something that he would disagree. So essentially, we need to replace that very nice article about contracts with the specification of contracts, which will have nothing about Walter's awesome personality in it. It should be just describe what the heck happens, right? So this is where we want to be with specification. Just Stan Smith tennis shot that has nothing personal. It's just like the impersonal tennis shot.
Yeah, it should have no opinions in it. It should not attempt to be a tutorial or things like that. Just a dry recitation of here's how it should work.
Nothing that says D-Rocks.
Nothing that says
no D-Rocks in there.
All right, next item. What are we going to do about property? Because property is also underspecified, and it does one thing, which is alter the return type of the function. Are we going to make this useful, and should we make this interact with ref properly, so that if you have a read and write access to ref, if you have a read and write getter and setter, can we make this work with ref?
So a while ago, I wrote a series of 3 dips about that also fix a hole in the type system with delegates. Arguably, maybe those are not written the right way or perfectible or what, but I don't have that much actionable feedback on them to make them any better. So maybe we should resurrect those if that's still an issue that the community wants to be working on.
Well, you say there's 3 dips. Why not merge them at least into one? So
it's easier to review if you have one document that does one thing. It kind of like look back to what Andre was saying, when he was trying to specify, I don't know, it was like binding to reference, even if it's an R value. And he ended up writing a bunch of stuff that have to do with lifetime of various temporaries and stuff like that. And I think it's a good idea to not put them in the same document, otherwise you end up with that giant document that addresses 25 different things.
So
right?
Keep them as 3 then.
And the other thing, I think being able to use properly with ref would make the stuff that Andre talked about in his keynote a lot less, fewer edge cases with that, because I see Jonathan laughing.
To do that, you basically have to do something like a delegate. The type's completely wrong, because like ref is just basically a pointer. Right. Yeah. And if you're dealing with these functions that do arbitrary work, it's not a variable anymore, like even conceptually. It's faking being a variable. And the more we try and add to fake it, the more magic machinery you have around that's just going to be a mess. So while conceptually it'd be really nice, I really don't think it's possible to do it in a clean way that's not just going to cause more problems. Honestly, the fact that it messes with the return type right now is actually a serious problem with type introspection and trying to figure out what the code's actually going to do when you mess with it. Because as soon as you have something lying about what it is, it becomes very difficult to use properly. So much as I like the idea of being able to say, hey, this is a property function, you should call it in this particular way, in terms of type introspection and actually using it, I think it really just causes problems that we're trying to have something fake what it is as opposed to just use as syntactic nicety.
Well, one solution could be to first I'll figure out what it does, specify what it does, and the spec has a special macro called best practices. And you can write best practices, don't use property, and just see where we are with that. Because I don't even remember exactly what it does, and I think it's underspecified, and it's hard to figure out how to fix it if we don't even know what it's doing.
Yep.
Are there plans to just remove property so that we don't have to explain it anymore?
Remove what?
Property.
Well, we can't just remove it because we'll break existing code.
Undocumented, marginalized.
Yeah, the old, you know, ever see the movie 10 Commandments where they chiseled Moses' name off of all the monuments? You know, we can make it an unfeature that way, but we should start by documenting it and then putting in the best practices section, don't use it.
So there's only one thing that property does, and that is if you take the type of a property function, it gives you the return type instead of the function type. That's the only thing it does.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
So
next.
Next up, so sorry, I've typoed this a little bit. That should be state of standard experimental, and then community projects is under the next thing. But so, what are we going to do about standard experimental? Because there are some, I don't know, what's the state of standard allocator at the moment? Is that done yet?
Not the high level part. We had a student doing great work on it, and he had to leave. He took a job, Microsoft, I think. Doesn't matter. But anyway, so it's not done. But we've run into resistance because people said they want backward compatibility from STD experimental. Like, it's in the word. The word. I mean, is my English that bad? No. And they say, oh, actually, you're breaking our code. Don't do that. I was thinking I can do whatever the hell I want because I don't know exactly how the high-level API is going to go. So let me mess with it a bit. The second I change a comma, I get the Nabucodonosor, like the slave choir from that opera. I'm getting like sung at my window in the night. It's like, oh, Andre, you shouldn't break our code, and this is terrible. We want backwards compatibility. We depend on this. So then there's also a forking of it by Ilya for the Mir project, and I'm not sure exactly what the state of that is. My thinking would be let's use dub going forward for projects that are to be ultimately migrated into the standard, and do with dub what C++ people do with Boost. Like have a separate place because STD, STD experimental clearly has been overused. People have just started relying on stuff in it, and probably that's not the best thing.
Right. If the high level stuff is still not finished, can we move the low level stuff out at all?
The low level stuff I think is solid, and I think we should. Actually, a better discussion would be, should we put that in the runtime? So low-level access, it belongs there, and it could be used by people who don't use the standard library necessarily, and it kind of feels like it should be in the runtime. I'm not sure if it's a very generous framework, but it's fairly large. And the question is, do we want to move such a large framework within the runtime, which is supposed to be like a small runtime library? So these are the questions to discuss.
Right. Guillaume or Marna, do you want to talk about the multimedia thing or whatever it is that you guys are doing, just as a publicity and sort of a formation of community projects for a central focus point for dealing with specific topics? Oh, so I'm saying the multimedia thing you're doing as an example of.
It's an informal work group of 7 people that met together because we were unhappy with UI in D, and everyone in this work group has built a UI at one point. And there were commonalities, and the first topic were to define, the basics or types that such libraries has to exchange. So we appointed Manu, and Manu did a wonderful work defining colors and correct conversion, and then images, building on both Vladimir's compile time construct and a more low-level untyped layer, which was done first with runtime typing information. So this is, I think Manu would have another view on the work group. The work group has a democratic process designed to enhance disagreement and create agreement over it. So that what we ask people is what they really want in such a library, what would lead them to use it. And of course, everyone is free to vote on the PR, and there is a formal description of the democratic process that accepts or not a proposal. So we have done a lot of user requirement gathering at first, and now it's mostly implementation. You can expect progressive JPEG and PNG loader, I guess, which are in the works. And we have already some image and color conversion are working. I will let Manu continue.
I'm not quite sure what's being asked exactly, but there exists this project. I guess the interesting detail is that it's somewhat democratic. Maybe it could be seen as a model for larger scale projects going forwards. Was there actually a specific question?
I just wanted to let you put it out there that is a thing. And
It's an advertisement, basically.
Hey, yeah, there's this work group that's into multimedia stuff. It's a really interesting problem. Everyone has a take on it, but the problem is that everyone writes their own libraries. So I think the interesting thing that's come out of this process is that a group of people have injected a whole bunch of different angles on requirements into a pool, and then we can design the library that way. I think it's started to create a kind of D code, which is kind of interesting because it spans, like D has a few silos, I think, of design space, and the code that's appeared spans more silos of design space than projects I've seen in the past. So there's something worth looking at. And yeah, if anyone's interested in multimedia, they should reach out because currently I'm the key committer and I didn't really want to be a committer at all.
But I was thinking also having that as a model for other interests, other points of interest to create interest groups. Anyway, Jacob, do you want to talk about DMD as a library? The stuff that you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I've been trying to use DMD as a library. I have one project that is using it, and running into various issues, trying to solve those issues as they come along. And one of the bigger issues is that the compiler is very dependent on global state, and if you want to reuse that in any more way than like a batch tool, then you need to be able to initialize and deinitialize the compiler properly. And so I've been working on at least trying to find this global state, and one way to do that is to try to annotate as much as possible with pure, since that does not allow it to touch the global state. And as we have here, one of the sub topics, diagnostics, that is one thing that is all over the place, reporting diagnostics, which is performing I/O, and that is not pure. So that's one of the roadblocks that I have hit. I talked a bit with Walter previous day with this. I've been thinking a bit more about this, and now I'm not sure if we can actually solve with a delegate as we discussed. So we might need to discuss a bit more. Yeah, I'm not sure that's what to add.
All right, good.
Ricky in IRC is wondering, I guess this is related, if anyone has looked into the small array memory leak in DMD front end? No? No? I guess that means no.
Write down. It's probably not as critical as it has been in the past, but it'd be sort of useful to have a record of what barriers are preventing people of specific user groups by sort of industry type and from other languages of using D. It would be sort of good to categorize those and have that serve as one of the bases of prioritization going forward. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about that. No? All right, next item. Another thing that would be useful to have would be sort of a record of forum discussions, because I'm sure you all know, we tend to get rather animated on the forum and produce very, very long threads. And there are some really, really interesting things that are hidden throughout that. But it really is needles in haystack. And it would be useful to have a record of that so that we can point to past discussions and have a summary of them, so that we can avoid redoing the discussions. We've got.
There is one.
There's one.
Yeah, it's on the digitalmars.com website. If you click on the
news groups.
Yeah, if you click on the forums, and then there's a archive thing. If you click on the archive, it shows each forum thread as a single static page and serves them. And there's a table of contents at the top, and you can see the entire thread and as one page. And it's very convenient because you can use, like, your browser search feature to search for specific things in there, and it's all nicely formatted and all that, and it works, and it's the entire newsgroup archive is there.
Right, the newsgroups page at digitalmars.com, and there's a table with all the newsgroups and mailing list options listed, and anything with an archive has a yes link that you can click onto the archive.
Is there a link to that on the DLang front page, or do you just need to know this knowledge?
We should put it on the DLang front page, actually.
Yeah.
On the menu, anyway.
I sort of meant also as a curated summary of discussions, as distinct from that. But
that requires manual work, and this is an automatic thing.
Yeah, that obviously does require manual work. Right. So last item for vision, a project horizon schedule. So we have a bunch of GSOC students. We have Laith to thank for running the Symmetry Honor of Code projects. We have a bunch of UBP students. And we have a bunch of wiki pages for delivering, sort of organizing projects for these going forward.
This is already solved.
I know, I'm getting there. So, I don't know, Sebastian, did you want to talk about what we've done?
Yeah, I guess you all remember the talk from Francesco where he was complaining that our wiki was pretty outdated and was really hard to find projects that are crucial and impactful to work on. And I think everyone here has like one or two things in the D ecosystem or infrastructure that you thinks that they should be fixed, but just doesn't have the time to. It's on DLang/projects. So our idea was just to create a repository and just use the issue tracker, and everyone can just put in the project that he wants or thinks is really crucial for D. And you have to go to github.com/DLang/project. And our idea was that we always have like a person who's an author, so we already know who created the issue, and we will ask like a few questions, like maybe you can even split this up in a couple of milestone. So there's like an example here, so how this looks like or could look like. So you already have a rough description for potential students, and for the next Symmetry Autumn of Code or next Google Summer of Code, students could look through all the issues that we create and have a better idea of what actually is important. Because it's GitHub issues, you can also upvote issues. so our students also know like what projects are even the most interesting ones for the D community. And they also know, hey, this issue is now 4 years old, so maybe like there was no interest, we just close it, right? What I'm trying to say here is that it would be really amazing if today at the hackathon or over the next days, if you have a project that you think, hey, this is something that is really important for the D community and would be impactful. You don't even have to mentor it, or just write it in there so we know about this idea and we can track it. And maybe you know someone who could potentially mentor it, or maybe you already have a rough idea on how we could group the project could look like, or what a student would need to learn to that, or how he could start. So just put all the information in there, and we'll try to promote this to the next Google Summer of Code or Symmetry Summer of Code.
Yeah, and I think we'll sort of model this on the DIP page. So you've got the ones that aren't yet completed are issues, and they can get taken and moved into the repository, and we'll have a record of that. So that's vision. Woohoo! And we've only used an hour and a half.
Not really a question, but more of a statement. Like this document here, it's nice, but this also has to go into that GitHub and has to be tracked with issues, because I mean we have awesome tools for developing software, and what are vision documents? Software specified in a very ambiguous language, right? So everything needs to go into GitHub issues and needs to link together, because the wiki is just a place for stuff to die. This is just not going to work.
Oh, yeah.
Like never works for no organization except Wikipedia, but they sort of have right.
One of that. All right. One more.
Just one comment. Maybe we need to use a Excel spreadsheet for that.
I'll make a note of that. Convert everything to Excel.
All right, so we have the DIP process. In the past and currently, it's been a one-size-fits-all, and I think going forward, we should parameterize that a bit more, because on a number of axes. One is the complexity of the DIP. So I don't think we should spend, I don't know how long it takes, 6 months, on something like the one that changed the keyword body to do, as one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, things like DIP 1000 and dealing with shared. We should sort of we should allocate review capacity proportional to the complexity. And what's the other one I was going to talk about? I was going to talk about something else. Never mind, let's go on with the rest of them. So I just sort of want to reflect on some problematic dips that we've had in the past, and what things we can do to change the dip process going forward so that we don't repeat those mistakes. I think one of the biggest issues with DIP 1000 was not that it was complicated, but that it was under-documented, and that was the other thing I was going to talk about, iteration of complex dips. So I don't think it's reasonable for us to try and one-shot specify really, really complicated dips. DIP 1000 had some iteration in the implementation and the specification post-review, and I think we should account for that happening in the DIP process so that it doesn't cause as much, I'm going to say confusion, but that's not what I mean, with the review process and the implementation, and a hard requirement for if those things change under iteration, they need to be properly documented. I see you nodding. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything. Johns?
Well, one thing that this would require, which is not required at the moment, is that you, like, in the process of writing the DIP, you also always start writing the implementation, right? Because how else would you do those iterations? And at the moment, that's not the case. I mean, there are approved DIPs which are not implemented at all at the moment.
No, so I mean, you put it through the review process, you implement it, and then you discover that, oh, this is not quite the way that things work. And then you have to change both the dip and the implementation to account for those unforeseen items. Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to second this point. There's a very good motivation there, I think, for actually trying to co-evolve the dip and the implementation at the same time. And if you look at a lot of aspects of engineering and industry, for example, things like safety case management, which is at least metaphorically applicable to this, that is increasingly the way they do things, that you don't just design up front, then implement. You co-evolve all the way, because that's the way you get best results.
Yeah, I think we have in the existing process the notion that the dip with implementation is vastly sort of more likely to be approved than one without. There are exceptions. For example, there's a very good dip on changing the syntax of contracts. That was very good, and it didn't need an implementation because it could have been assumed, which was the case indeed, that it was not implementation would not raise impossible to solve issues. So I think there's a bit of a wisdom to be used in that, but all told, I think a complex dip without implementation very difficult to get through.
All right.
I would like to add one thing about the time to get a dip through the process. I've already asked Walter and Andre about this, and they've approved it. We're going to constrain the review process from the community review period to the formal review period to no more than 3 months. That's going to be constrained to that. As for other details, there are some other aspects we need to look at, and I'm going to need to talk to Attila about that, because Andre's going to step away from the dip process formal assessments, I believe. So Attila's going to be taking his place on that. So I'll need to get with him and figure out how we can improve things going forward.
Excellent. So the next one is DIP 1015, which was the stopping weird implicit conversions to bool of, like, if you have a Unicode character literal that's /U001, that would implicitly convert to true. The community wasn't happy with that. Wasn't happy with the outcome, and particularly, I think, the rationale for the objection. So if you want to clarify what your problems was with that, I believe the words you used were that bool was an int, which was...
All right. It was a while ago, and I don't remember all the details, but my attitude of bool is it's a 1-bit integer. It's not a magic type with special properties. It's a 1-bit integer, and it should behave like an integer. And my impression of the objections to that is bool was special and was not an integer and didn't have integer properties to it, and that people would be confused if it was conflated with in an integer. And my response to that generally is, if somebody's confused about Boolean being an integer, I kind of wonder why they're programming in a very powerful systems language like D. It just seems kind of incongruous. I expect people who program in D, although we try to make it user-friendly and we don't try to make it gratuitously unfriendly, there's some certain level of knowledge is expected. I would expect people to understand what a 32-bit value is. To a lesser extent, I expect them to understand that floating point values have their problems and they should know what the problems are. I expect program in D to understand what and or and bit masking operations are, and that we shouldn't be trying to paper over that stuff and hide it. I don't think that works. We did have an experience with papering over and hiding things, and that was autodecode. And it turns out that trying to hide the fact that a string is a sequence of UTF-8 characters just turned out to be the wrong answer. And to put it mildly, we don't need to argue about that now, but I don't think we should be trying to hide what a bool is. A bool is a 1-bit integer. That's how it's implemented. It's how it's behaved. It's how it's optimized. And pretending it's not, to me, is in a systems programming language, is just the wrong approach.
The main problem with bool is that when you have an enum that contains the values 0, 1, and 2, if you use the third enum value, which is 2, it will call the int overload. If you use the first or second enum value, which are 0 or 1, they will call a bool overload and not do the implicit conversions like you might expect.
I don't think you're going to fix that problem. It'll just come up other ways. If you run into those problems, I kind of would step back and say, maybe you've got too many overloads, and what are you trying to do with those overloads that it would matter if it called a different overload. I think sometimes overloads are used far more than they should. They should be more specific and more targeted. And using overloads to do two very different things, to me, just has a kind of a smell about it. It shouldn't matter if it pulled the different overload. It should still work properly. Yes.
If you're looking at the operations that can be performed on a bool, bools fundamentally have different operations than integers. Like not a single operation that makes sense on an integer makes sense on a bool. And all the operations that are used in bool, the AND and OR operators really don't make sense on ints. If you use it on ints, they convert to bools. Furthermore, if you have an enum, for instance, I personally tend to think of bool more as an enum containing false and true as members, which also would, in a sense, could also in a sense be mapped to an integer. Then already in D, you cannot convert in literal to that type because it's understood that it's a separate domain.
The only other thing I would add is that we have true and false literals for bool.
Yeah, and I don't really think they serve a whole lot of purpose to have true and false literals. I guess part of that comes from my background, I admit, where I've worked in digital electronics, and to me, 5 volts, 1, true, are all completely interchangeable in my mind. There's no difference between them, and I work, between 5 volts, 1, and true back and forth all the time. And it's not true that bool doesn't support certain operations. It's just that they have the degenerate boundary behavior.
Right. Actually, I tested that. I didn't believe him, so I tested it, and bool does behave like an int. So it would be more confusing if we kind of made it to behave not quite like an int. Sorry?
Bool behaves like an int, but not the other way around. Bool implicitly upconverts to an int, but sorry again. Bool implicitly upconverts to an int, yes, but it's still a very, very tense subset of.
Well, shorts convert to an int implicitly, but ints don't convert to shorts implicitly. It's the same.
Well, we have the range propagation. We have the range propagation.
Well, aside from that,
under the right conditions, we do allow that. I don't think it's different for bool.
In my mind, the simplest integer operation is plus increment. Bool doesn't have that.
Yeah, it does. It sets it to 1. True. It sets it to 5 volts. That's what it does.
And if it's 1, what does it do?
It stays there. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, I believe it stays there.
You can try.
So it doesn't come up. Anyway.
Time?
We can discuss that later. We've had a lot of stuff about DIP 1016 in sort of this conference. I just want to sort of more about the process than the outcome, because we've managed to reach a successful. Doesn't pop. Yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
About what to do when we discover DIP breaking behavior post community review, because that was the whole assignable things that look like L values that are not, particularly with like property functions and stuff, about what we should do when those kind of things are discovered post community review, because that caused a lot of annoyances to the community. That
improve the community review.
Right.
I'm sorry to be blunt, but this it was undesirable that the community review did not discover those issues.
Yeah, that is the point of the community review and the final review is to find those kinds of issues. And I know some people think of it as a vote on the dip, but that's not what it is. It's not a vote on the dip. The point is to find those issues. And sometimes they're going to slip through. But when they do.
What I mean is that the community has no chance to fix them post discovery, post review. Like if it's discovered that the dip has some flaw that's not being discovered, and then it's discovered in the final review, there is no way to amend the dip to account for that problem other than starting again, which it's not so bad now that if we're going to constrain the review process so that it doesn't take
let me
6 to 9 months.
Let me explain this. If we find a major problem in the community review, then the dip author will have to revise the dip, and then we go back to repeat the community review, a second round, right? The final review, let's get our terms straight. The final review is before the formal assessment by the maintainers. So in the final review, that's our last chance to find another problem. If we find another problem there, we will go back to community review, if that's fixed. So that's the stage before the formal assessment. The community. Yeah, that's the community. All right. So the formal assessment, I would have to work out with Walter and Andre. They have sent dips with minor issues back to the dip author for revision. The in-out contract syntax, that was one of them. We had to rewrite that dip a little bit. We had to rewrite some sections of it, and then it was approved. So there is a process for that already. Yeah.
Joseph?
Actually, I think for the final review, maybe there is a chance, to realize, if this dip has a feature. I think it makes no sense if you really identify some things like the case with the shared, because maybe if the plan is to really think about the memory model, it makes no sense, to just suggest some changes that even if these are solved, there is a clear understanding that maybe this dip simply has no feature. Yeah, it makes no sense to redo the community review. Yeah,
right. It depends on the severity of the hole that they find. That's the whole thing. If it's solvable, we can solve it. But if it requires a complete revision, complete rewrite, or a completely different approach, that's a completely different story.
Joseph?
Okay, just a quick apology to Ali. You're absolutely right about ++ on bool. But it sounds here like the key thing that we need is documentation of what is required from the community in terms of reviewing, or a key thing we need here is documentation of what's required from the community for review, in the sense of what are the kind of questions you should be asking when you're looking at a dip. Okay. Because the comment would be, it very often looks like the process that happens in practice is people go, do I like this feature or not? Do I want it or not? And that's very different from going really rigorously through what's actually there and saying, yeah, but does this work? How does this impact the language? And so on and so forth. So I'm not trying to downplay the work you've done. I know it's a lot, but it feels like this is somewhere where we can get more precise and maybe a better process going.
One thing we have done is we needed an example of a dip that is the right way to do things, because nothing, you can have a list of bullet points, a good dip should do X or Y, but that really doesn't drive it home like then an example of a good dip. And Andre and I have picked out a couple of them, and I think Mike has displayed them as, these are examples of what a good dip should be. And one of the reasons that, Andre is working on the R value dip is he kind of wants to make it as a canonical, this is what a good dip should look like. And we want to raise the bar in general on the quality we expect in a dip. And the best way to do that is to do it by example, we feel.
I agree, by example is good. In some ways, example of what is not a good dip and why can often be more useful.
We don't want to do that because we don't want to be in the business of telling people they do lousy work.
I mean, I'm sure you're imaginative enough to think up examples of something, of a proposal that isn't a real one and say, this is why this is problematic.
I suppose. I just, I don't want to basically run anybody down by saying this is an example of not work. We just don't want to have a community like that.
Yeah, so I just looked at the procedure document, and there are details in there about what each round of the review is supposed to be, and I will clarify that more to be more explicit about it. But please, anyone, when we do a community review or a final review, before we hand it off to Walter and Andre, please make sure you read the document, the procedure document in the DIP repository before participating in one of the reviews. And I do have a question here from IRC.
There's a very good IRC question. Should a DIP be accepted if it's well written, but most people don't seem to want it?
No, it's like the writing part is the form, not the content. Like, what is a printf good because it has the right flags in there?
Would enums be accepted? Not enums. Would attributes have been accepted if?
But will what have been accepted?
Attributes. Would attributes have been accepted?
User-defined attributes?
Yes.
Yeah, user-defined attributes, which most of you know, but I'll explain, was an idea of Manu's. And he said that it was be really useful. And he convinced me it was really useful, and they wanted it right now, so I just went ahead and did it. And this annoyed a lot of people. I didn't follow any sort of process, I just did it. So what can I say?
So I think what we can say is that we should try, we want to live into our ideals. So we want to not do that in the future.
Yeah, we want to be an example of how to do things. So,
Robert? Yeah, coming on the popular point again. I mean, just because something is unpopular doesn't mean it's not good. I mean, the doctor is telling you need to go on a diet or you will die. It's an unpopular statement, right? Diets are not fun, but you still have to do it, otherwise you will die. So I think if the community says we don't want that, but it still has merit, it needs to go in.
Yeah, but the question was if it's so nicely formed, if it's nicely written, but it's not necessary, do we accept it? That's the way I interpreted the question. Yeah, of course, popularity would be not the best measure of predictor of success. Yeah.
Jan?
So coming back to where we started the discussion in basically, the thing is, like, at some point during the DIP process, maybe no more problems are found, and then during the formal assessment problems are found, and then the DIP will get rejected. And the main thing is, like, or the point where a lot of frustration comes from is, like, at this point that there's nothing you can do about it, or like the formal DIP process does not have any process how to proceed from there other than to restart. And you already mentioned that there were cases where it was sent back, so maybe it would like at least be good to formalize how this can work. I'm not sure if that's necessary or if it would improve things, but like at least people would know what can be done, what the next steps can be.
So that's a revision. It's about the revision.
Yeah. Basically, if it's a minor solvable problem, we can go back and revise it, and if not, they have to go back and start over. So yes, I probably don't specify that in the procedure document, and I absolutely can. And I also want to say, I'm open to any criticisms, any feedback you have about the process. I'm willing to change what I can about the procedure document, but the general framework The structure of the dip process, that's not something, that's above my pay grade. So, but I can take anything, that we need to discuss with Walter and Andre, and we're open to feedback on that, absolutely.
So one more thing I would like to say is that I think at every stage we should be able to say whether or not we would like to have this dip. I'm going to use two examples here of the post-move one. It would be nice if we didn't have to have that, but ultimately dealing with internal pointers, the motivated example there was the GCC's standard C++ standard string that has an internal pointer, and that was the motivating example of accepting that even if we didn't want it. And then I think so. And then the counterexample is originally before we had Cover constructors with reference counting. We really wanted to do that, but we discovered a memory safety issues with doing so. So I think it's. I want to sort of liken it to the scientific process of if we want to do this dip, we should try and do everything to prove that we don't need it and it's bad. And then if it survives all of the assault, then that's good, and we can look to accepting that based on other metrics. And similarly, for the opposite case, if it looks like a dip that we would like to not have to have, we should try and find all paths around that to some other way that we would like to have that.
One effect that I've noticed over the years is if I step in early on the design process of a dip, what happens is the person working on it quits, and they just assume I'm going to take over the thing.
If you step in to help, not in a critical way, if he steps in with an encouraging comment, or yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, Walter is gonna do it.
Yeah, and that's what happens. And there's been a graveyard of a lot of things where that's happened to, where the person just quit, and that wasn't my intention at all.
And I have personally witnessed Walter. I forwarded information from Walter to somebody writing dips, with Walter telling them what would make the dip acceptable, and they completely ignored it. So that's another issue.
Yeah, well, they're free to ignore it.
Yes, they are.
It's just that I don't like that I make a suggestion and then they decide to quit because they just say, oh, Walter's handling it now. And there isn't enough time for me to.
There's a very recent example of that, I remember.
There was one, the named argument.
Oh, yeah, the name arguments.
Name parameters. I
name parameters.
Posted
Thank you.
There was a long thread about that, and I posted why the various techniques proposed didn't work, and posted a technique that I felt would work, and that was the last post in that thread. It just the whole thing was very active, and as soon as I posted that, everything just came to a screeching halt.
And he didn't post a negative. He posted like a positive. His post included the right solution. Yeah, and then everybody assumed, oh, cool.
Oh, Walter's doing it. And that was the end of it. It completely stopped.
Matthias?
Have you actually talked to the people involved in those threads or in those dips and asked if their sentiment was that you would take it over? Because I don't know what the normal rate for dips dying is. And I'm not sure if this is something that's actually in any way validated or if this is just an impression.
I don't really understand what
was the comment?
What was the comment about?
I mean, for instance, assume that dips are dying all the time for any sorts of reasons. So presumably it's possible that a dip has already died and then you leave a comment and it stays dead. So I don't know, like, have you actually talked to people and they said, I thought you were going to take it over, or they said, I thought this was Walter's thing now, and for that reason I'm not updating it anymore, and I'm not doing anything anymore on it, or is this just an inference?
I think evidence suggests it's a safe assumption. I mean, if so many dates ghost you exactly when you do one thing, then
Yeah, okay, well, Ricky's saying, I hope he doesn't think he's taking over the name parameters dip, because I agree with him.
All right.
So he's
awesome.
He's going to revise it, actually.
He's going to revise it?
Yeah. So the two name parameter dips, they're still in post-community review. And we've got to move to the next topic. We got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
8 minutes.
Eight. All right. The only other the dip related thing I want to talk about is what people should expect to do when the entire community doesn't like a specific sub feature of a dip, particularly in regards to implicit. This was more about consuming review time than anything else. I don't know if you want to say anything on that.
You're saying like if I like or dislike a feature in opposition to everyone else?
So the example here is the implicit part of the copy constructors dip. There was significant resistance throughout that first and possibly second community review against that particular sub feature of the dip, and that sort of consumed the review based on that. I think we should be able to identify that particular sub feature is problematic and deal with it so that it doesn't derail the entire review.
Well, here's how the copy constructors thing went. Razvan made the proposal. It got debated extensively on the news groups and revised and stuff like that. And then I kept suggesting compare it with the C++ thing. And so finally I reviewed it where this is how C++ does it. And this is how we should adapt that for D's in the way that D's different, because there's long experience with the C++ one, and we should use that as, if we differ from it, we ought to have a good reason if we differ from it. And D differs from C++ on a lot of things, and I feel we have strong reasons where we do differ, but with the copy constructor, I couldn't find strong reasons to not do it that way, except we do const differently and
initialization of fields,
initialization of fields differently. So accounting for that, I think working with Razvan on it, Razvan came up with a very strong dip as a result of that, and a good implementation. And I'm actually pretty pleased with how it all worked out.
Well, Razvan, Joseph. No.
Just to say, what you did in that case of going and comparing to the C++ standard, it's a very good example of something we should be pointing to in guidance for community reviewers to say, this is the sort of thing you should be doing to be helpful in the dip review process, because there's an objectivity in that is much more valuable than the kind of things of, do I like this, don't I like this, without reference.
It's like with name parameters. I mean, you go on Google and you put name parameters in there and you look at how everybody else does it. And that should give us kind of, how can we, that'll cover cases we didn't think of. And also we have a golden opportunity to take other people's experience and do something better than all of them. But to ignore that is just a huge mistake.
Related work is an essential section in any dip. Mike has it as a requirement. I was the one who proposed, who added it, and essentially again, just as fans, if you don't understand why other languages did something a specific way, you can't design a better way. And I think it's essential. I don't think we should put something like, oh, look at how C++ does it. But I think we should, because then that's going to be misinterpreted and taken out of context, etc. But you should have your related work down. This is like any scientific paper, and we aim to be as scientific as possible with the standard that dips. Any scientific paper with no related work is a crock.
But you're talking here about what the dip author does?
Sorry?
Wait for the microphone.
Yeah. You're talking here about what the dip author should do. Absolutely correct. But there's also a question of what should community reviewers be doing and what should they be looking for?
But a good related work section.
And I'll add that to procedure document as a.
We're actually uniquely fortunate with having Andre, because he is one of the world's leading experts on C++. Many times I'll ask Andre, why does C++ do that? And Andre goes, well, here's why they do it, and here are the known problems with it. And that is, really invaluable information. his experience and knowledge.
His good intelligence. Which the enemy's ways. Razvan, did you?
I just want to thank the community. All the forum posts, I had a lot of replies, and that really helped to see what the problems are. So thank you very much.
Cool. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so we can continue discussing the general topics and the internal implementation topics at the hackathon. Right. This concludes the AGM.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right, and before we get started with the hackathon, Mr. Wittelsbach over here has something he wishes to announce.
Well, I already did that before, right, with the project. Okay, so if you don't have any idea what you're going to do during the hackathon, one idea would be writing up 1 or 2 proposals for the next symmetry automatic code, or I think Razvan also mentioned that it could also, they're having bachelor thesis and master thesis done on D, so maybe a student could pick that topic up as a thesis, right? But the point is we need to have this list of projects that students could do, or any person could do, which are impactful to D. So that would be one idea to write those up. And yeah, for the hackathon, I guess maybe one idea to start, because I guess you all have different ideas you want to work on. I think the last years we always had this short introduction, so everyone just says, hey, I want to focus on Vibe D today and just discuss about it, or I just want to start a D meetup in my city and just want to talk to other people if they experience, and maybe find a couple of simple lectures, simple examples on how D can be taught. So maybe we can start the hackathon with a short bonding period where a couple of people just quickly tell what they want to work on over the afternoon, and so that they can find each other.
I just want to add that we are taking bachelor students and master students. So if you have any projects that you think would be suitable for someone who is not very, very experienced, maybe what you would consider right work, you can just tag it over there, because it would be easier for us to choose and to pick.
All right. I think we're just about ready to start the hackathon, but
sorry.
1 minute.
One more thing of sort of a general topic issue that we could deal with now. Razvan, could you just give a summary of the current status alias this, because you've made a number of changes over the last 4 or 5 months, so I just want to let the community know what sort of things have changed with that.
Well, I discovered in the compiler that there's an issue with the alias this when it comes to operation overload. So basically how it is implemented, there's a function in the compiler which searches to see if an operation was overloaded. And typically what it would do, it would search to see if the struct has that method defined. And if it doesn't, it is going to search for the alias this. So once the function return, you don't specifically know if the struct defines that that operation, or if the alias this field has it. And that leads to a number of issues. I solved it for a few of them, but the bug still manifests. And also there are 2 issues that we're not quite sure how to solve them. One of them is alias this and classes. So basically, since alias this is manual inheritance, you're getting multiple inheritance, which D does not support. And the other one is a bit more complicated in the sense that it affects the matching levels that Andre has talked yesterday. So if you have 2 functions, one that gets a const struct and the other one another struct that has an alias this, typically the alias this is viewed when you're matching arguments. If you match by an alias this, that is viewed as a match by conversion. But also if you do an implicit conversion to a const or something, that is also viewed as an implicit conversion. So you would get an ambiguity, whereas the feeling is that you should go with a conversion to const. So I've been looking into trying to fix that, but there is no obvious solution to that.
Cool, thank you. I need volume. Yeah, I've got volume. Anything else, Mark?
Yeah, before Ethan does his thing, I just was told that we do not have access to downstairs now, so please stay upstairs during the remainder of the hackathon.
Yep.
Will the hackathon be in this room then?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly here.
Okay.
Hacking right now. But since I have the microphone and the screen, you know, we had static for each as a result of the hackathon a few years ago, and that's been utterly handy for everyone. And I showed this little bit of code last night at DConf. This is currently my biggest bugbear in D, right? So you look at that and you think, okay, that's a perfectly normal bit of code. But in instantiating that template with an integer will currently break. If you want this code to work for everything you throw at it, you need to also add an additional duplicate definition of the template just to handle an explicit type. So I've spent this entire conference emceeing, trying to make you people happy. You know, 3-4 days of doing this. If somebody could fix this today for me, you'll make me happy. So please, somebody, I want to write less code. I'm a lazy programmer. Let me write less code. Stephen, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, you can do that with one overload by using a variadic template. And just say
Yeah,
if.
but I mean, a normal user will probably just try to do that alias symbol and then it'll break for them. And then they've got to know, oh, a variadic template? Nah.
If anyone wants to know how to do weird stuff like this, just go look at std.traits. You'll see.
Yeah,
all
but
kinds of
can we
weird
make
stuff in
it not weird? This is a part of the usability of the language thing that I'm trying to get it. You know, it shouldn't be arcade knowledge. It should be as simple as that.
I agree with you. There's no disagreement, but
So please make me
There's a
happy. And yes, I think that's about it from everyone. Nothing else from Walter and Andre? Nothing else logistically? Then let's get hacking.